Imagine crafting some of the most haunting folk songs of your time and no one hears them. No record deal, no audience, just a handful of tapes. And then one day you just pack up your car and vanish. That's Connie Converse. And if you don't know her name, that's exactly why we're talking about her. Hey, welcome back to the Unstreamables. I'm Jonathan Townley, and this is the show where we step away from the infinite buffet of the algorithm and dig into the overlooked, the analog, and the almost forgotten. Today, we're talking about Connie Converse, her life, her music, her disappearance, and why she never got the recognition she deserved. But first, let's talk updates. So you might recall I tried something new and different these past couple weeks, going semi-offline with a minimalist phone. I wanted to talk a little bit about that first. Where it worked, fewer distractions, more present conversations, less doom scrolling. Where it didn't, no camera, no QR codes, no instant Wikipedia deep dives, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So it created some friction where it wanted it to, created some other friction where I didn't want it to. And, we're just going to keep experimenting. On the whole, a great little phone, a great, elegant, easy to use, nice form factor, feels solid in the hand, keeps the distractions to a minimum. It does have Signal, which is an encrypted messaging and open source messaging platform. You might find that useful. Your mileage may vary. So let's move right on. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the reaction to Filter World by Kyle Chayka, how algorithms flatten culture. I keep seeing this theme coming up again and again and again. It seems to be in the zeitgeist right now. It's nice to have sort of the algorithm work in my favor, I guess. So I recommend picking up a copy of that book, Filter World by Kyle Chayka. It's a good read. It's a short read. You can get it from the library. You know what they say, having fun's not hard when you got a library card. Second, I want to talk a little bit about live author events that we went to last week. So Tori Amos was in town, did a signing of her new children's book, Tori and Her Muses. And I picked up a copy of that for my niece, as well as her book Resistance, which is about the fight for artistic autonomy. Happened to get both of them signed, which you can't get on your Kindle. Speaking of signings, Cory Doctorow was in town. He was talking about mainly his new book, Picks and Shovels, which is believe it or not, a detective story, and the detective is a forensic accountant. I guess they can't all be little old ladies writing mystery novels or Hercule Poirot. Every detective nowadays has to have a twist, and his is that he's a forensic accountant. There are 3 books in the series. Each of them gets better as the character develops. The first one, interestingly, takes place pretty much in the present day. The middle book in the series steps back into 2006 or so, the early years of the post-dot-com crash, pre-2008 recession. And then the third book steps back even further into the 1980s and kind of the punk rock scene and the computing scene in San Francisco. We get to meet Jello Biafra. If you don't know who that is, you should know who that is. If you do know who that is, then what's the hashtag? If you know, you know. There we are. And so the last one ties in really well with today's episode because Connie Converse was somebody the industry overlooked. And here is the book about her by the wonderful Howard Fishman, brilliant writer. So we're going to talk about that and dive into that in just a couple minutes. So highly recommend that book if you like a long read, because it is a long read. It is very well researched with close help of Connie's family. Who was Connie Converse? Before Bob Dylan, before Joan Baez, before Joni Mitchell, before the folk revival really took off, there was Connie Converse. She was born in Laconia, New Hampshire, Elizabeth Eaton Converse, raised in a strict Baptist teetotaling household, and she was the valedictorian of her class and was sent on scholarship to Mount Holyoke College. She dropped out, moved to New York City in the 1940s, and started writing songs. They were deeply personal, ahead of their time folk songs. I'm going to pause and say, when I first heard of them from my sister-in-law, Jackie, I was, first of all, deeply moved that she gave me a selection for the show. Like, I had never heard of Connie Converse. I actually had never heard of Howard Fishman, and now I'm a huge fan. So hope to have him on the show one day soon. But the songs are ahead of their time. And as you listen to this show, think about if you like folk music. Most of what we think of when we think of folk music is either the protest stuff or like cultural folk music from different cultural groups in the United States. They weren't as much written by them as traditional songs. I'm talking about more of a predecessor to the singer-songwriter movement. So Connie never had a record deal. There was no folk circuit at the time. So in 1954, she recorded some songs with Gene Deitch, who was an animator, illustrator, and audio enthusiast. He later became, I guess unironically, the guy who rediscovered her and brought her to NPR. In her time, though, Connie never really had a record deal. She was a bit of, for lack of a better word, a polymath. She was a brilliant illustrator. She was a brilliant editor. And after she left New York City, went on to do work in a number of serious academic publications. She deserved that scholarship to Mount Holyoke, and her intellect, evident in this book, is just stunning. And the songs reflect that intellect and that sort of personal quality in a time when people just weren't doing that. So she did a brief appearance on the CBS morning show with Walter Cronkite, and then silence. It sounds to me like she was discouraged by like the near, just the continual one step forward, three steps back of the day. The music recording industry just wasn't ready for her. By the early 1960s, Connie was done trying. She left New York, stopped writing music, moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where her brother was a professor. He was no slouch himself. She took a job as the managing editor of an academic journal, the Journal of Conflict Revolution. Friends said she became more isolated, smoked and drank heavily, and in August of 1974, packed her belongings into her Volkswagen, wrote letters to her family and friends, and drove off to never be seen again. From Howard Fishman's book, I became gripped by the kind of overwhelming discomposure that can arrive when we hear, for example, a beloved song from our childhood, or one that reminds us of our first love, or some other pivotal moment in our lives. Music can have the power to transport us back in time, reminding us of what it was like to feel extraordinarily happy, or hopeful, or cared for, or free, a phenomenon that is sometimes accompanied in our minds by a cinematic series of scenes, memories, and faces, all now gone for good. I've read this a couple times now. I haven't really gotten through the whole book yet because I'm sort of besieged by the first few chapters of her life, or the first few chapters, and Howard's own personal story about how he came into this music by happenstance at a friend's party. And I have a lot of the same feelings. I also identify with Connie as an artist coming to New York City, and I can really relate to the idea that she was going to be up to big things here and got frustrated. For some of us, we move on and find other careers and pivot, and she really wasn't the compromising type, it sounds like. I'll let you know when I finish the book. If you want, we can read it together. So if you pick up a copy from bookshop.org or from my favorite local Brooklyn bookstore, Books Are Magic, again, not sponsored, we can finish the book together. For decades, Connie's music sat in a box, literally. Then in 2004, a radio host at WNYC played her music for the first time, and people were floored. Gene Deitch kept those tapes from 1954, and his son, Kim Deitch, passed them on to David Garland at WNYC. In 2009, her first official album, How Sad, How Lovely, was released 55 years after she recorded it. And in 2023, Howard Fishman publishes his book, To Anyone Who Ever Asks, which dives very deeply into her life. This is not a small book. This is like the size of a small city's yellow pages.
How sad, how lovely, how short, how sweet.
Why did Connie Converse disappear? The personal reason is one thing. The bigger reason, it's the same reason artists struggle to get noticed today. The 1950s were very rigid. Only certain artists got a platform. Today, algorithms do the same thing, but invisibly. If you don't fit the mold, you don't get surfaced. What was once controlled by record labels is now controlled by recommendation engines. And as we know, the bias is baked right into them. The more things change, the more they stay the same. A little selection from Howard's book that kind of speaks to what we were just talking about. Documenting ourselves has now become such a part of our everyday lives that it's easy to forget how relatively recent a phenomenon it actually is. Go back just a few decades, and we're in the world of cassette recorders. Connie Converse's music is finally streamable, but what about the artists today who never break through? My final thoughts: step away from the infinite buffet. Find something off the algorithm's menu. Be your own curator. So subscribe, share, and let me know what lost voices we should cover next. Visit theunstreamables.com. Less algo, more rhythm. See you next time.